Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Lady Cee and JT, and today we have the absolute pleasure of sitting down with someone who's been creating a space for real talk, raw healing, and untold stories, Laura X. Timber. You may know her from the powerful interviews she's done with survivors of religious trauma, addiction, and some of the most courageous journeys out there, including my husband, JT, because he recently was on her platform. But today, we're flipping the script and want to learn more about her and what made her start this channel. Why is she amplifying voices like ours? And how does she hold space for so much pain and still have room for hope? So grab your tea, your tissue, and your truth, because this is a conversation about courage, purpose, and the healing that happens when people finally feel seen. So Laura, welcome so much to the channel.
Thanks for having me. What an amazing introduction.
Glad to have you on, Laura.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, JT.
Glad to have you on.
We are so glad to have you here. And like I said, JT and I have been on these airwaves for a long time now.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of people. And not only that, but we've talked to other people who were not part of the Jehovah's Witness faith, and they have had us on their platform. They've been on our platform. And so that's why we're asking you to be here, because we realize that you're out here talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses on your space as well. And so you want to just give our audience a little bit of background about who you are and what your interest is in a topic like this?
Oh, sure. So I was going to say, how long do we have? How far back do you want to go?
All right.
It's like, where do we start this story? So I grew up in rural Ontario, which is in Canada, fairly small community. I had a beautiful childhood. My parents are God-fearing Christians, grew up in the church. And then when I got into my later teens, went to college. And when I finished college, I came back to my hometown and I kind of fell into this work at the women's shelter in my local area. So I did frontline crisis counseling with victims of domestic violence for over 13 years. And I love that work. It was incredible work. It was, you didn't know when the phone rang what it was going to be. And I loved it. It was thrilling. It was exciting, but it was also mentally very taxing. So I did it for about 13 years, shift work, and life happens. You buy a house, you have kids, I'm married, that sort of thing. And it just started to take its toll. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to step back from this. This is too much. There's, you hear so many stories, terrible stories. You're continually surrounded by negativity. Stories that you can't believe are happening. And one thing that stuck out to me too is I would see a woman that came into the shelter, and then I would hear about it on the news, and it was always different. It was never the way it actually was. And if you had that one little piece of information, you would know that the story was completely different. So anyways, enough was enough. I stepped back. I was like, I'm done. I'm burned out. But there was this part of me that wished I could continue to do it. So fast forward quite a few years, the pandemic happens, my kids get a bit older, and I started having this on my heart that I want to talk to people again. Not that I'm a nobody, but I thought there's a lot of nobodies out there that have a lot of stuff to say. And what can I do? Right? I was driving around in my small town, and I'm not exactly sure the area of the states you guys are from, but the drug epidemic has taken over. It is absolutely, you wouldn't even recognize our town, what has happened in the last 10 years. And I started thinking, like, these are people, they have a story. What gets you to the point where you're sleeping on a sidewalk in rural, Ontario? Like, what is your story? What is going on here? So I started talking to some people that I knew. And I was like, I have this idea. I want to start this YouTube channel. I'm feeling really conscientious about it, though. I have no experience doing it, blah, blah, blah. And there's like, go for it. If you got a story to tell people, you want to support people telling their stories, go for it. So I said, okay. So I bought some cheap equipment off Amazon and I started. And I started talking to people that I knew and that they had stories. And then I started branching out. Hey, do you know this person? And referral through referral. And then I had someone that said to me, well, there's this homeless breakfast that you can volunteer at. And I'm sure that the people would talk to you. So I'm like, okay. And you got to make sure it's safe, right? Because when you're walking into environments like that, when people are in active addictions, your safety is paramount. So I joined this group of amazing local volunteers who just had this grassroots movement. And their main purpose was just to show up in a parking lot, open up the back, serve coffee, serve treats, and everyone that came contributed to it. So that's what I did. I just started going and showing up and talking to people, and amazing people. It was an amazing environment. I always made sure that I was safe when I was talking to the people. I was right near the group. But then the group, there were a few changes when winter came. They moved inside and there wasn't the same opportunities to talk to people. So I still kept doing that. And then in the meanwhile, with my channel, I was reaching out to other people and exploring other stories and, making lots more connections. And that just kind of started me leading to more just doing it exclusively online, because I did run into some safety concerns with talking to people on the streets. I don't have to go into them too deep, but things got a little colorful, let's say. So then I thought, okay, well, I can talk to people online like this. I can figure out these platforms. Like, why not? So I just kept coming up with problems, and then I come up with a solution, and then I just keep going for it. And then I've always just said, like, I'm a Christian too, and I've always just said, okay, Lord, lead me where you want me to go. And I ran into an Exjw and said, hey, you want to tell your story? And then that led to another one.
So let me ask you something. It appears as though you've always had this interest in trying to work and help people who are going through a lot of life's challenges. When you went to the shelter, did you see people who were actually Jehovah's Witnesses there, or did you meet just a whole cross section of people? I was just wondering.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I would say we had more actually ex-Amish than we did Jehovah Witnesses. I did work with someone who was an ex-Jehovah Witness. But yeah, there was everyone from all walks of life there.
Now that's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
That
Yeah.
you had people from the Amish.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what about the number of people that shelter could handle? How many people were there?
At the time, it was a 10-bed shelter. So that could be divided up into lots of different ways. Most of the time, we went over capacity. So it could be, 5 women, two kids, and then we could have maybe one woman that had 4 kids. So it was all first, I wouldn't say first come, first serve, because they tried to always accommodate everyone, but they always just worked with what they had.
That is interesting. And so how many people worked at the shelter? I mean, were you the only counselor there?
You know what? That's what's funny about this shelter. And I would never want my children to work in this kind of environment. It was an old spooky house from about the 1880s. It was up on a hill. And I swear this house was full of spooks. So great big old Victorian house, probably about 6,000 square feet.
Wow.
And at night, when I'd be working a night shift, I was the only staff that was there. During the day, there were more staff, but at night, there were a lot of times where I was working and I'd be, what was that? It was spooky.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. What about men? I guess you only took women in, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was exclusively for women and children. So that was nice. But there was always, if there was a threat that an abuser was going to come on property, they would allow us to double staff on a night shift. So there'd be two people in the building at one time. But it was a pretty large responsibility, working, having vulnerable women and children under your care. and you're responsible for watching the cameras, keeping the shelter clean, talking to them. You also always carried a phone with you. So you would carry that phone on your hip 24/7 the whole time. Like it was pretty intense.
Wow. Now you said
Yeah.
you didn't really have any Jehovah's Witnesses, but when you had people there at the shelter, were any of these people associated with a religion?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was lots of that there. Lots of spiritual manipulation that people would talk to. And there was everything. Like, I mean, I was there 13 years. So you hear so many different stories. And just when you think you'd heard it all, you hear something else that's totally out there. But when I worked there, they were just starting to transition to a point where they were allowing people more that were in active addictions to stay in the shelter. So when
Yeah.
it had originally started, I actually worked with some women who had been there for 20 years and had worked with the people that had started the shelter. And when they started, it was just a house. And if they get a call in the middle of the night, they'd run out, get in their vehicle, run to an address, kind of wait, pick up the person and gas it out of
Wow.
there. So yeah, it was an interesting environment, and talking to people that had been there a long time and how it had shifted, because I've been out of that environment now. I think it's been about 6, 7 years, and it's changed substantially since then too, because so much has happened with the trans movement and has happened with addiction.
Was this also supported by any religious organizations, financially, so you guys can keep running?
No, we were all supported through the government. So we were not government employees, but all the funding came through the government. They did do some fundraising in the community and stuff like that, but no, it wasn't associated with any religion or group.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of big churches like the Catholic Church and stuff like that. I'm not really sure if they have that. They have shelters and stuff, don't they?
I'm not sure. I actually recently did an interview with a lady who is a nun, and she was telling me about their their group supports a retreat that people can go to and stay at. So I think it just depends on what their mission is and how they work it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We know
I know.
Jehovah's Witnesses don't have shelters. We know that.
No,
We
yeah,
do
that's what
know
I was gonna
that.
say. Yeah, witnesses don't have shelters in fact, of any kind. Food banks or clothing banks, they don't have anything. So it's kind of ironic when Jehovah's Witnesses end up having to turn to other groups that, as a witness, you would never support as a volunteer, which is ironic. Witnesses typically don't support these types of groups as volunteers, but unfortunately, if they need the help, that's the first place they'll have to go, because within the organization there is no such arrangement, which is kind of ironic for a Christian organization.
Yeah.
Right. And it is interesting that Laura, that not only were you, covering addiction, and because you were actually, associated with that women's shelter, and how you were able to stumble across these Jehovah's Witnesses. And it just goes to show that someone who is out here on the YouTube channel and realizing that this is a good story to tell, because I remember watching the black and white Perry Mason shows, and Perry Mason would not take a case with a defendant unless he knew that they were innocent, the defendant. He would not take the case. So, you realize that there's something here with these Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a good thing. And that's why we really wanted to, double click on your story, because we wanted to show any lurking witnesses that, look, there's something to these stories. Because if there is someone out here talking about and hosting someone on their channel, I'm assuming you're doing the same thing that Perry Mason was doing. You're hosting people because you believe that their story is true, right? So at that point, it's like, hey, look, Jehovah's Witnesses, perk up, because there's something about these stories that's being told, and people can't keep saying that we're apostates and we're going against God because we're talking against the governing body. Because Laura is an example of a person that can show, look, there's something about these stories that need to be told. and that's why she's got them on her channel.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize I stumbled upon it, right? And then I started listening and I'm like, whoa, whoa. And then I'm like, you guys had like a child abuse scandal the same way the Catholics did? I'm like, why does mainstream media not talk about this? I'm like, why is this not out there? I'm like, I want more information. And yeah, just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah.
When you started looking at the people that you've interviewed and the people that you were dealing with in the shelter as well, what is like a common thread that you see that kind of weaves itself throughout these people's life experiences, though?
I guess it's a few different things, but something that always sticks out to me is people want control, people want power, they like to manipulate other people. And that is always the root of it with everything. People, I look at the Jehovah Witness and these people being hungry to have power and control and dominate. And that's what we see in these relationships with women that have been abused. We talk about the cycle of abuse, the honeymoon stage, going through the different phases. It all comes around in a circle. And it amazes me that more people aren't out there like myself talking about what is going on in the Jehovah Witness church, because it's such a closed community. It's almost as closed as the Amish when it comes to dealing with issues that are happening with marital issues, with the bishop being in control in the Amish community. And people just drive by and go, oh, isn't that lovely? Look at those cute little Amish kids. But then when you go in and you start looking at the environment, you go, man, there is a lot of bondage in here. You aren't allowed to dress how you want to dress. You have to act a certain way. There's all these social expectations. And our world isn't living like that anymore. When I grew up, we would go to Sunday school and we had to be prim and proper and bows in our hair and everyone dressed to the nines. Well, now church is just people go in, we take you as you are. So when you see environments where people are being controlled so much and they're completely changing when they walk in the door of somewhere, something's not right.
That's right. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are so sad because they're not as closed off in terms of like, going into the world per se. Because I think the Amish, they have their own communities where they're like living on a compound kind of. But the Jehovah's Witnesses is like every day I went to work in an office. And I if I was really like in a situation where I was trying to get away, there were people everywhere that could have taken me in, but it was a situation where you were mentally in bondage and you knew that these people were not the people that you would hang around.
Yep.
But I mean, I wasn't as bad until I got maybe more into it after I met JT.
Yeah.
But I had roommates and I had moved to this DC area, and I was working with all these Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think the more people that you have around you will actually make you really fall in line. But when you're by yourself, you can make those, have those conversations with people at your job. Mm-hmm. But I don't even think the Amish can even, don't they? Because we go to the Amish market in our area, and they got the little bonnets on, the little dresses, the little homemade dresses and stuff like that. But that's their job, so they don't have to go out into the world to work because they're selling produce to everybody else, So yeah. they have a really bad time,
Yeah. They're definitely more isolated, but I think that spiritual
Yeah.
manipulation is very similar to what's going on in the
absolutely because to be free, to be walking around free, not realizing that your mind is warped. Yeah. That's probably the worst kind of manipulation to have.
Yep.
Yeah, you've always in these types of groups, you're always dealing with somebody controls some of the most simple things in your life. The type of clothes you can wear, who you can befriend, who you can talk to, where you can go, what you can read. And so you kind of see that even within some marriages. You may have a controlling husband, doesn't want his wife to work. She has no money. She has nowhere to go. And it's kind of ironic that that's kind of the way it is with a lot of the witnesses. You have no friends outside the organization, so you feel you have nowhere to go. And so it takes its toll on people, but eventually they will end up at places like you were working at, trying to seek help many times, and it's very difficult. And even those who don't, because I've noticed some of the interviews you've done, some of these people, they didn't go to shelters or anything, but as it were, their mind was locked. They could only think of one way in terms of thinking. As you look at, and we've always been kind of fascinated about how people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses view Jehovah's Witnesses. And so that's a question I know me and Lady C were discussing that about how people who are not witnesses. Lady C, was there something in specific that you wanted to ask her? I think you had mentioned earlier.
Oh, just about, when I think I may have already brought this up
Okay.
about how a person like for Laura, I was going to ask a question. Did you go to school with someone who was a witness, and what that look like in your area? And not only that, but we're in the United States and she's in Canada.
Yeah.
So, when we're out walking around, we see witnesses on the street all day long. What does it look like there? I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, because Canada is also a Western country as well. So they're just as equally. I mean, you've been to the Canadian branch, JT.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just as into this as we are.
Yeah.
Over here in the States.
Yeah. I grew up having them knocking at the doors. Grew up in school with Jehovah Witnesses who didn't, do any of the Christmas activities, celebrate any of the birthdays. I always just felt bad for them. I'm like, oh man, that must really be hard.
Yeah,
See?
that must suck. I know, right? That's what people say.
Yeah.
How can you live like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, that sucks. You're a kid and
I
you
know.
can't have a
That's
birthday
what people
party.
say.
Yeah.
Exactly. What was your experience, Laura, when it came to the kids in school? Did you notice that did they have friends that were not Jehovah's Witnesses, or were they more like loners?
I would say more loners. People couldn't understand. We didn't understand growing up. We were just like, well, that's weird. Why wouldn't you do that? Right?
Yeah.
Now, see, that's
Not like I was
interesting.
rude to them. We just didn't interact with them because they're socialized differently, right? There's
they
this
are.
fear
Yeah,
with them that
that's
I
just
didn't
the way it is.
understand at the time.
Well, what about did you see like one or like a group?
I went to school in a fairly rural community.
Okay.
A few hundred students at the school.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like there was a large population of them. We have a few Kingdom Halls around our area, but I remember a few in particular, just one or two in our class at a time. And yeah, they would stay together, but when they weren't in the same class, they kept to themselves. They kept their head down, they did their work, and it's sad, but they just kind of stayed invisible because they weren't able to interact with so much that was going on in the community. When it came to like Christmas plays, when it came to sports teams, when it came to everyone planning sleepovers, these kids wouldn't be allowed to go. So eventually they're just doing their thing, putting in their time.
Well, so wonder why you're talking about the Amish, because I had such a different experience than so many people that I saw a little bit of reality and normal living. So I'm thinking, wow, if I wasn't around other Jehovah's Witnesses, hey, I'll be talking to these people in my class. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, wow, that's amazing.
One of the things that witnesses are always taught, and I mean, I believed it, and others I know believed it, and that is how people who are not witnesses view a Jehovah's Witness. We were taught that we're always being under surveillance. People are watching us. They'll take the scripture from the Bible where Paul says, you're like in a theatrical play. You're on stage all the time. Did you ever find that your pastor or your family or relatives who were not witnesses, did they ever talk about Jehovah's Witnesses? I mean, did they ever mention them? I mean, because that was the impression that we had, that Babylon the Great and other religions were always talking about us as God's people. But did you ever find people ever having a conversation at church or at home about Jehovah's Witnesses?
No, absolutely not. I was in the church community. I was born into the church that my parents attended, and not once was it ever brought up in a sermon that I remember. And in school, we just were like, oh, I don't know what that kid's doing, but okay, whatever. Like, no one cared.
Yeah.
No one cared. Like, and it's not in a rude way, just there were other kids that were, Catholics. There were children that had different things going on, but not at all. Like that is so made up. It's funny that it's comical that they have this idea that we're creeping around. The only thing we ever talked about that I ever brought up would have been, oh, I had a JW at the door. And that was until my later years, right?
Yeah.
The only time we talked about you is when you showed up at our door knocking and then wouldn't leave.
Yeah. Totally
Yeah.
understand that one.
Yeah.
And you know what? But I think
That's
I
true.
think the really sad thing about the Jehovah's Witness children is the fact that every day you're not celebrating Christmas or a holiday. And so
Yeah.
you had other months that you just had nothing going on. And then there were just things like 4th of July, which nobody really gives nobody gifts for that. You just go watch the fireworks. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you just I couldn't understand why some witnesses just didn't have anything to say to anyone in the class, because in every class I went to, I had friends, and I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, you know. So, I got a chance to go to their houses. My mom and dad met other parents because of me being that child. But it's just interesting that, you're really touching on something there, Laura, when you're saying that they're so much like the Amish. The people that you
And
met,
that was just my experience. Someone else's
Yeah.
experience could be
Oh
totally
yeah.
different.
Everybody
But
has their own experience. Yeah.
the ones that I remember, I think they were actually cousins, and yeah, they stuck together. There wasn't much going on besides the two of them, and I remember talking to them a bit, but they were very odd and very standoffish, but I didn't have the knowledge to know that they were, they were being taught that I was talking about them, even though I didn't even know that that's
Yep.
what was going on,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So
Yeah. And then too, it's like where you're raised, like you said you were in a more rural area. So then they could have been more laid back, more conservative. Because Jehovah's Witnesses, there's conservative witnesses and then there's liberal witnesses. Maybe
yep.
I came from the liberal side. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting how you can go from one country to another, see people, like in what you're describing, and then we always thought that the witnesses in the city did more than those in the country,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
But
Laura,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm going to cut you off.
Oh no, go ahead.
Laura, with your channel, what are you trying to share with people as a non-Jehovah's Witness? What are you trying to share with people?
My whole purpose is to build a platform that people can come to and just simply share their story, uninterrupted, uncensored. I mean, we got to go by YouTube guidelines, but just have a place that if someone wants it to be part of their healing process and they want to talk, then, let me know. Give me, reach out to me. I've just been letting it flow. I try to just be quiet when my interviews start. I figure if someone wants to hear what I have to say, I'll do my own video, do something like this. But I guess my whole part is just to let people be heard.
I think
Yeah.
that's good, because I was telling JT earlier that what makes your channel kind of unique is the fact that you don't have a dog in the fight. And so when people come to your channel to be heard, it's like there's a neutral space where a person is not like saying, "Oh yeah, I went through that," like what I'm doing here, right? I'm telling you about your story and what I experienced.
Yep.
But now you're getting somebody who is not able to do that, and you get more of a chance to just talk about you and just you. It's just so for you, for people coming to your channel, do you feel like it's kind of therapeutic for them?
I think so. I know that for me, most of the time when I talk to people, they want to share their channel They want to share their book. They want to share their story. They just want to be heard. I've had ones that's it. They just want to say their piece and that's it. So I guess it's a bunch of different things for all individuals. I've had a few people come on where I don't totally agree with what they're saying, but I also feel that it's important to hear other people's side of this story and understand where they're coming from and to just listen, right?
What kind of things
Yeah.
are you getting that you might not be interested or you may not be agreeing with?
The detransitioners and transitioners. So that's widely debated with women's rights and what's happening in
Okay.
sports and washrooms and what constitutes as a male now versus a female coming into our space. So I had a gentleman on and we did one and there was no hostility there. It was just a nice conversation. And I'm like, I want to understand, where are you coming from? Why do you want to use our space? Why do you think that you're a woman? Like, as women, we've had to fight for these spaces. We've had to fight for our independence. And now you want to just say you're a woman and come into my washroom where I'm changing my child, where I'm, doing my makeup, doing my feminine stuff. I'm like, why do you need to be in there? Right? Like, why, what's your side on that? And, we obviously didn't agree on that at all. But it was nice to have a respectful conversation with someone that wasn't going to get super defensive and start screaming at me that I'm homophobic or transphobic and I'm a terrible person. So it's all about, I like learning from people with life experience. And that's been a big thing for me about the channel.
Hey,
Okay.
that's good. I
Yeah.
like
I
that
don't. Yeah.
because
That's so true.
I got
Yeah.
raked over the coals because I interviewed an LGBTQ Jehovah's Witness on our channel, and this is probably about maybe almost 8 years ago. And I was so frustrated. I took the video down because they were telling me I was using the wrong terminology. They were just attacking me from all sides. People were attacking me who were LGBTQ for using the wrong terminology, and people were attacking me who weren't LGBTQ for having them. So I was like, you know what? So you are to be commended for allowing your space. And I was like, I'm not doing this.
It's tricky
That's
though. It's very
that. Well,
tricky because
it's. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I mean to cut y'all off. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's tricky though, right? It's this fine line of why, because people say, well, why is this person on there? Why do they? And I said, look, like if someone wants to tell a story and they're going to be respectful about how they tell their story, I'm not going to, I don't always agree with life choices that people have made when it comes to addictions. But here I am having them on and letting them share their story and talk about that. I don't agree with this person's life choices, but it doesn't mean that people can't hear it and understand it and use critical thinking skills and go, oh, that's where they're coming from. It's not about building a narrative to be able to fight back against them. It's to be able to understand, where is this movement coming from? And what I've actually learned by interviewing some of these people is that within the trans community, there's a divide. And I didn't see that divide before. There's, people that are on one side saying, yeah, no, like we don't need to be in your washrooms. We don't need to be this. And then there's this other side that's saying, no, we have a right to be here. And because of X, Y, Z. And it's interesting, right? I've seen people within that community fight and then,
That's true.
then post comments about me too, but whatever.
Yeah.
That has got to be very hard. But like I said, because you're neutral and you're able to, share that space. And like I said, that's when we first came out, on our YouTube channel. And I really feel like we've come a long way in terms of handling the comments and stuff like that, because it's like, okay, it's just somebody behind a computer that doesn't have a face that's just saying stuff, and you're
It's
gonna get
hard. It's hard.
Yeah, well,
It's
one of the
hard
things
putting
kind
yourself
of
out there.
unique about YouTube is that you're gonna get it from both ends, and you kind of get used to that. I know, coming out of the Jehovah's Witness background, you were so conditioned to have just one perspective on everything. Basically, I mean, everybody had to think alike. I mean, I was talking to someone that says basically, when you think about it, this is a religion where there are only two careers that a typical Jehovah's Witness child could pursue. One, be a regular pioneer, which means you go out and basically knock on doors and try to offer Watchtower publications and leaflets and flyers and that kind of stuff. Or you either go and work at the main office in wherever the branch is. And those were basically the only two careers a Jehovah's Witness child could actually talk about and not get dogged for it. It's the only two careers a parent could actually talk about, and they wouldn't get dogged because, my child's going to be this or he's going to go. They couldn't do that. And so you were always taught to fall in line and think the same way. So one of the things that was kind of interesting when we left, that was one of the first things we realized, that everybody doesn't share the same views, and they're not going to share the same views, and that's just life. And so, I look at it as, people are as different as they are as many people as there are. You can get 8-9 billion different views by asking the same question, as it were. And so, people, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people run into, is that people don't sometimes realize there's also another perspective. That's what made Jehovah's Witnesses so unique, because, they took the position nobody else can explain the Bible. Nobody. We're the only one. And then when you look at the teachings, you're like, well, you got this one wrong. So you quickly realize that no one walks around as the holder and the container of all knowledge and information. But people, when they share their stories, people get to see that, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I felt the same way. And that's what we have noticed in dealing with people over the years. There'll be those who will agree, and there'll be those who won't. And you can't really get bent out of shape over either one, because, as they say, life is too short. Life is too short.
So, but I think, do you think we got a good flavor of her story, JT?
I think that
Okay.
you have basically, because what we were looking for was basically try to have someone who's not a witness to give a perspective on what they have observed. And that is so important, because that way, like my wife mentioned, you don't have a dog in the fight. Because sometimes people come to the town, well, you just biased because you left, but here's a person who's simply an observer. Person is simply observing. And we think that's so important, that people get a chance to see there are people who are not witnesses. They have nothing to gain, but they're making observations about what they see. And there are things within the Jehovah's Witness religion that need to be addressed. It's just that simple. It's just that simple.
Yep. Okay, so Laura, is there any other things that you would like to share with our audience about your channel that you think may be interesting to them?
No, I think half the time some people, it's like you think that people are going to click and they don't even click, right? So I just welcome anyone to jump over and check out my channel. And I just thank you for having the opportunity to come here and speak to you today and just learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing and where you come from, because the work you're doing is incredible. I was looking at your channel and I'd written down some stats. You guys, what started in 2013, you've reached over 9.5 million people on your channel, and that's pretty incredible. So well done, you two.
Yeah, quite a few people. Our philosophy has always been, someone helped us, pay it forward, help somebody else. That's very simple, because somebody helped us get out.
There's a lot of people that are leaving now, and we've got to get back out to meet a lot of these people that's out here, because there's a whole new crop of individuals that have left the religion as well. So we've been gone for a long time.
And we've seen a lot of the changes, and for people who are leaving, the changes are good. For those who are still inside, the organization has somewhat lightened its foot off the back of their neck in certain areas. In other areas, they put the foot to the pedal. But the organization, in order to continue to survive, they realize they have to change. And basically, they're becoming more mainstream. Pretty soon, you won't be able to recognize Jehovah's Witnesses from any other denomination. And physically, in the way they're dressing now, you can't. So they're changing a lot of things that they taught was requirements of God, quote unquote. And of course, it turns out just to be some guy's viewpoint on what you should and should not do. So, So I think it's going in a direction that we think will be positive for people in their lives.
All right. Well, Laura, we really thank you for taking the opportunity to be on our channel. For individuals that would like to Find her on YouTube. She's under the name Laura X Timber, and I will put a link in the description of the video, and also to all of her other social media. I think you have a Facebook page and Instagram, right?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we just want to thank you for helping us do what we do via your channel as well, because every voice is important. We firmly believe that every voice is important.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being in our audience, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Take care.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.